Um, we will be able to.
Okay, good.
Brandon, do you want to start? Do you want
just sitting up there above a mirror?
Sure. Brandon, do you want to start the webinar just so people know they're in the right place? Is that because we're probably 3 minutes out?
Yep, let's do it. I'm hitting it now. And we are live on YouTube as well.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
We will start the webinar in 2 minutes, right at 1 o'clock. So thank you for joining us. Those who have joined early, we will start the webinar in 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us today.
I will let you know real quick, Walt, the chat feature on YouTube doesn't appear to be working. So maybe I'll refresh that periodically and hopefully that'll come up.
Yeah, it may come back. It may come back. We will start the webinar in 1 minute. So thank you for joining us today. Those who have joined on early, we will start the webinar in 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon. I am Walt Bauer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Human Development Institute's first spring seminar. We welcome all the participants who are joining us online. Our presenter will provide an opportunity for questions this afternoon, and we welcome questions from all of our participants. Please type your questions for our speaker in the Q&A box for a robust question and answer session. Please use the chat box for technical questions. You are joining the webinar on mute and without video. We have live captioning for this webinar this afternoon in the closed captioning feature. To turn on the captioning, click on the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and then click Show Subtitle. Should you have any questions about CEUs, you can contact me. Please take a moment at the conclusion of the seminar to complete our brief evaluation. The evaluation will be sent to your email address after the seminar. It is really helpful as we plan for upcoming seminars. The title of this seminar is Business as the Social Engine of America, Enhancing the Employment Success of Young Adults with Significant Disabilities through Supported and Customized Employment. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Phil Rumroll, the HDI Director of Research and Training. Dr. Rumroll.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Bauer, for the housekeeping and for all you did to put together this first of our spring seminars. I want to add my welcome to all of you, and it is my honor and privilege to be able to introduce our speaker, Dr. Paul Weyman. Dr. Weyman is a rehabilitation psychologist by training, and he has been a faculty member in special education and physical medicine and rehabilitation at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU, in Richmond for more than 40 years. Paul, I think you started when you were about 9 years old, if I'm not mistaken. And Paul also directs the Rehabilitation Research and Training Center at VCU, and has been in that role for many, many years as well. Paul is well known to anyone who works in inclusion-related fields for his pioneering work in supported employment and transition, customized employment services and supports for people with a variety of disabilities, such as autism spectrum disorder, intellectual and developmental disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, and many, many more. And many of our audience members have read some of Paul's more than 250 professional journal articles, his 50 commercially published books. And with all of those, he is certainly well known nationally and internationally as one of the most respected and prolific authors and researchers in our business. Paul, I could go on and on and on, but I won't. I will tell you that if you had any doubt if people are paying attention to the work you do, I think there's a strong testament to that, and that we have about 1,250 folks registered for this program this afternoon. It's the afternoon here on Eastern Time Zone anyway. And I think that says it all, Paul. And with that, I will yield the microphone to you with our sincere thanks and gratitude to you for providing this lecture to us. The floor is yours, sir, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Phil and Walt, both of you. And I want to give a special shout out to Kathy Shepard-Jones and Phil and Walt, and also to Jennifer McDonough, who was very helpful with a lot of her thoughts on some of the business aspects of this presentation. Really excited to be doing this in conjunction with the Human Development Institute, the University of Kentucky, and a lot of the things that we're going to be covering have been heavily in my mind, because I continue to be frustrated, as many of you are, I know, with why it is that we continue to have tens of thousands of people with disabilities either underemployed or unemployed, or frankly just not even getting opportunity to really get in the door, especially since it's 2021, notwithstanding the horrific 2020 and the pandemic. The reality is that we know so much more. So a good part of this presentation, and really the title kind of says it all, is going to be focusing on things from the perspective of business, and having us, who are probably predominantly providers, talking about the role of business. And I just want to say a word or two about this at the beginning before we start rolling. And there are a lot of slides and there's videos and things like that. And there will be time at the end for a number of questions. A copy of the entire PowerPoint will be available right at the very end of the presentation, okay? But not right now, unfortunately, but at the end of the presentation. But it's become really clear, I think, well, I know this is true with many voc rehab state agencies, and with some of the more progressive community rehab programs. But then there's a lot of people who are new coming into the field that just may not realize that if we don't partner with business and understand business, that we are not going to hit the targets that we want to do. So, and that's where my slides are going to be going for a good 30, 40 minutes or so. And then we'll pick up, areas off of it a little bit further. But and yes, the webinar is 2 hours, but I'll probably talk for, probably a good 90, 100 minutes. We'll see how long I can last. Okay. Okay, Walt. So Walt's going to move these slides for me, and if you go ahead, Walt, that would be great. And you're going to also thumbnail me too, I think, Walt. But if you would do this first slide, it would be good. All right. So I just picked out a few of the slides that are in Kentucky, big companies like Kindred and Humana and FedEx, IBM's in there, Yum. Okay, go ahead. So, and again, Walt, I was saying to you before, if it's possible that you can put my picture smaller in the corner somewhere as we go through this, it would be better because it is overlapping somewhat the slide. Okay. So if there's a theme to our presentation, it is what are the human and social challenges of this unemployment? And I also want to talk about underemployment. Okay. And what are the best ways to bring people with disabilities into the workplace? So next slide. So if we look at, in this next slide, we're talking about business, which is the demand side. This is the group that needs to have good workers, all right? And so let's just take a second for that. No business is going to grow and expand their revenue base and create the type of culture they need for customers and market share without good employees. That is a critical feature. Any business person will tell you they need to generate revenue and they have to have really good business people. And as a person who works at Virginia Commonwealth University, and for many years I've had the privilege of running a rehabilitation research and training center. We have about 100 staff and anywhere from $10 to $12 million a year of federal or state money. But with those staff comes the responsibility of having the right staff, people who understand how to reach out to people in the community, communicate well with the community. And so when you look at the demand side, you're looking at unemployed persons with the supply side and business with the demand side. So as we go through this, particularly this first part, I'm going to be approaching this from the way business will look at. So on this next slide should be what we'll be covering. There we go. We continue to have a high percentage of people with disabilities unemployed, 60 to 70%, or we wouldn't be even doing it today. Businesses ironically continue to report they have a hard time finding programs where these people with disabilities are. And yet they do have needs which can be filled by workers with disabilities. I've had some really great conversations with a number of people in the business world. And what they tell me is that individuals with disabilities, individuals who may be coming from other countries, immigrants, older people who've retired and want to come back. These are other populations that they have to look toward in order to fulfill some of the needs that they have to generate revenue. Remember, generating revenue and profit and also having a good community footprint is critical. And that means good people. Okay, next slide. But unfortunately, businesses still do have lots of fears, and there are myths and concerns that are out there regarding people with disabilities. Okay. And of course, you know, those of you who are in Voc Rehab and understand that I have a number of favored colleagues from Virginia VR that may be on. So shout outs to people like Dee Dee Batten and Donna Benessi and Richard Kreiner and Kathy Hayfield and also many of the counselors that we worked with over the years in a partnership. And a lot of this, you know, is going to be just reinforcing what they know. But frankly, businesses don't understand, you know, what an individual work program is. Okay. They won't understand necessarily what CRC is or IEP is or PRES means. And so this language to them is sort of like us listening to KPIs. You know, how many of you out there know what a KPI is? Well, a KPI is a key performance indicator, and it's a critical metric that businesses use to make decisions. And I was actually speaking with a company in Virginia not all that long ago who have identified diversity inclusion as a critical KPI for senior management. And I thought to myself, oh man, that is fantastic. All right. That's becoming an important KPI. But that's language that they don't teach when you're getting your master's degree in rehab counseling. Okay, next slide. So there are misperceptions about people with disabilities in the workplace. And for some of you who are like me and who have been doing this work for a long time, or, you know, if you've got a DJ Hendricks who's on here from, you know, the Job Accommodation Network, this is old news. But for people who are newer, you know, or who are very new or family members or advocates, these are some of the misperceptions that are out there. I mean, you know, there are still feelings that, you know, boy, it's going to cost so much extra time to work or to call in sick more. I have people with disabilities there. And they're not going to get the work done on time. Not. That's not true. In fact, you know, again, you know, if you look at like hospital, and they'll tell you that the interns with autism were showing up on snow. A lot of the other employees are unable to show up because they love work and they won't be there. So that is not a correct, you know, perception. That is a misperception. But unfortunately, does then cause either supervisors or interviewers from business maybe to not have the best feeling. Okay, so next one. So what's the research show? Research does show that we need more accurate and practical information to dispel those preconceptions and concerns about hiring people with disabilities. So how do we really do that? Well, we can have talks like this, and I don't want to put myself down, but the reality is these are just talks. Or we can actually try and help as many individuals with disabilities become immersed in different companies, different industries as possible, with severe disabilities, mild disabilities, mobility disabilities, sensory disabilities, physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities. It doesn't matter, okay? But the more they're immersed in the workforce and they're doing well, employers begin to have different viewpoints. Research shows that employers want credible information that includes facts and statistics to dispel those myths. And again, I would argue that working with people is an excellent way to overcome a lot of those myths and misconceptions, concerns, fears, whatever. That's why I am a huge fan of internships like Strength on Success or the Bridges program or Project Search. There's a reason that internships have been so popular, and that's because it's a wonderful way for business, which is the demand side, and people with disabilities in their families, which is the supply side, to get to know each other. Okay, so the next slide. So, businesses frequently performed. Again, here we are again with the healthcare costs, workers' compensation problems, cost of hiring, and the belief that people lack skills. And here's a really big one that we've learned in our research the last several years. One of our research performing business one, that supervisor may be uncertain about how to take disciplinary action. And that's why a good rehab counselor or a good employment specialist or employment consultant can make all the difference in the world, okay? Because that supervisor, in a sense, can be getting modeling, kind of a go-to consultation about what should we do. Buddy, I don't want to fire them, but they're not really cutting it, or their social behaviors or their soft skills aren't really good. But it's going to look bad if I fire them because I know my boss really wants to keep them here. So, that is a legitimate challenge. Okay. Some of these other ones, I think people find out pretty quickly that healthcare costs, they don't skyrocket. Okay. And some of these cost issues are not what people think, but there is a genuine challenge often if a supervisor has never worked with somebody, for example, who either speaks very unclearly or can't speak. How do I communicate best with them? So just, dropping people into job. Again, that's the supply side, and that's our responsibility to team, okay? But the reason I'm starting with business, folks, is because more than ever, I realize that both on the pre-service side and the in-service side are not shown. Employment specialists, our teachers, our transition specialists, our counselors. Let's see, I've got a great question here. We may want me to turn off my video. Let's see, I wouldn't mind having my video off. Should I turn my video off? Perfect. How about that? Maybe that's better. Okay. So let's see, I don't want to lose that train of thought there. So staying with business and understanding the culture of business will empower us to help individuals with disabilities, okay? All right. Next slide. So continuing, let's take a quick last look here at some research. 14%, that's about 1 out of 7 companies report they're actively recruiting people with disabilities. I'm going to go with that research and say that I'm not really very happy with that. That's 1 out of 7. That's not really going to cut it, all right? And I think that reinforces some of the earlier issues. HR doesn't know who to contact. We haven't created the pipelines that we need to, and we'll talk some more about how to deal with that. Larger companies are more actively to recruit, and smaller companies, a third. But then again, smaller companies, which we'll say are less than 50 or 100, that's only 1 out of 12, 8%. And those are companies that really need and want to grow. Some of the largest companies, they don't need to grow. they may go into different lines or segments. They may take over different companies and have to add people. So it may be that, there's always going to be some more positions with larger companies, but in terms of the percentage relative to the revenue base, the smaller companies, in order for them to generate their base, their revenue base, and make it larger, and then replicate their companies in different parts of the state or the region, they're going to need employees. And if they're only going for 8% of people with disabilities, they are missing out. And then service producing industries are more likely to recruit, and we've found that, than those in goods producing industries. Now, I'm not sure I know the reason for that, but that's one I'll leave for the significant number of people on this to think about it. Are we only pushing people towards service jobs? Are there just more service jobs out there? Or are there goods producing jobs, but we're just not in that, we're not in that world as much? Something to think about. Okay. Next slide. So what do employers think about the impact of persons with disabilities? And before we switch to the next slide, we ran through one of our research and training centers, which is related to successful employment practices. We ran a state of the science employer panel. We had a number of employer panels, and we don't have enough time in this presentation to cover all that, but we've got about 5.5 minutes of a video that Walt's going to put up that I think will be helpful, and it will give you an idea of what a couple of employers from different industries thought about. Okay, and Alyssa Brooke is going to go ahead and narrate it. So go ahead, Walt.
So I'm going to go back around to Jim. Now, we've talked about, your experiences, but I want to know, when you were first approached and started thinking about this, did you have any reservations about hiring people with disabilities? And if so, how were those resolved, or maybe not resolved?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I've had some of the normal reservations that anybody would, particularly, given that this was a number of years ago when we weren't quite as open to these things as we are today. But the advantage that I had is I had leaders who, either because a family member was disabled, or they had some other experience in their past, or just the fact that we're in healthcare, so we're accustomed to working with people with a wide variety of disabilities. So the leaders would approach me and say, I want to do this in my department. I want to employ people through the Salvation Army who are struggling with addiction. I want to work with the Department of Rehabilitative Services to hire people with Down syndrome. And so that's how we got started. So I didn't have to encounter any resistance. And to the point some of the other speakers made, we had some fairly high-ranking executives who had personal interest in being an employer that was open to employing people with disabilities. And the final point around that I'll make is OnScore Mercy Health has been around for a couple hundred years, and we are sponsored by the Roman Catholic Church. So part of what we are about in our mission is is helping people and accepting people, and those types of religious principles that permeate the reason that we exist. So that, coupled with being in healthcare, I think made it relatively easy for us to proceed with this work.
Yeah, and I think that some organizations talk about their mission, but as was mentioned in the presentation this morning, and I've been walking around in scrubs and bon secours hospitals for like 11 years now, you really feel it. They're not just talking about this as their mission, but you really do get to experience that. Doug and David, can you guys also talk about this question about your reservations?
it was interesting from my standpoint. I didn't have any reservations. So my role was really to alleviate the reservations of the team. And when we kicked this off, I recognized that the only way that it was going to work was if the entire organization was involved from day one. That included a union workforce of over 300 employees. So I brought everybody into a big lunchroom, and we had over 300 people, standing in the room. And the first question I asked, and if you recognize that 1 in 54 children is on the spectrum, is that it impacts so many families. And so the first question I asked, I said, raise your hand if you know a family member who's autistic, or a neighbor's a child who's autistic. And when you see in a room of 300 people, virtually every hand goes up. It expressed the size of the issue that we are all dealing with. And so I think when all those hands went up, everybody in the room said, wow, this is a huge issue. How can we help? So that's how I kicked it off. And then from that point, David and his team worked very close with my, senior executives and management team around, here, what is autism? You probably haven't been around an autistic person. And, most people hear all the horror stories versus recognizing that the spectrum is very, very broad. And then each one of these individuals brings something to the table that is truly valuable. The other piece that, and it was said earlier, and I say this all the time, when I did this was not about charity at all. This wasn't about creating a situation just to give somebody a place to show up to. This was all about creating opportunity and having individuals feel a true self-worth. And so when the organization truly found out that this was a financial benefit to us, here, as an employer, when unemployment rates go down to 2 and 3%, you have an entire potential population of employees out there waiting to be hired. As an employer, I'm saying, all right, I need employees. How can I get them? And so rallying the team around it was ultimately the call that made that happen.
So I'm going to go back around to
Okay, so Walt, I think that's it. All right, so the first gentleman, Mr. Jim Godwin, was for a number of years the head of the director of human resources for the state of Virginia Bon Secours, and is currently, I believe, the chief director of strategic resources for the overall company, since Bon Secours Health System has merged with the Mercy Health System, making them like the 5th biggest in the country for faith-based hospital systems. And he's been just extraordinary to work with. And the second gentleman, Doug, at our colleagues from the University of Wisconsin got to know him because he was a CEO at Hartschaffner Marx and had, as he mentioned, strong family connections with individual with the disability. And when we get a little bit later and we talk a little bit about impression management and some things like that, I think that'll be a point. I think the third bullet under research shows, and this is a lot of the things that came out of some of the material that we've learned from talking to business over not just the last 4 years, but really over the last 20 years, like you could really say. But the closer you can get to the C-suite, the closer you can provide intervention at a senior management level, the greater likelihood you have on focusing companies' policies, which will include disability, inclusion, race, gender, all the types of things where companies are realizing more than ever, certainly after last summer, but even before then, that their company will get a leg up on other companies if they're more diverse. They will be able to recruit better people if they are more diverse. If they only have one type of person giving them ideas about how to market their product or service, they are not going to be as powerful. If they only have one kind of person who customers see all the time, and yet those customers reflect the different faces of America, to coin a Joe Biden phrase, then they're going to be at a disadvantage. So smart businesses of all sizes are increasingly opening their eyes to capable and qualified people with disabilities. And it's up to us to make sure that those people with disabilities get in front of business. And it's also up to us to provide the trainings and the support on an ongoing basis if necessary, so that business doesn't feel that they're just taking an unnecessary risk or doing something that is, charity. When in fact, more and more managers, I can tell you this for sure because I've talked to them, they're telling me they want to hire people with disabilities because it will make their company stronger to be able to sell and to grow. And that's what business needs. They need, in order to sell, grow, and have a strong footprint in their city, in their county, in their region, or nationally. It only takes 2 or 3 or 4 companies. Take Starbucks, for example. They've had a couple of incidents. Well, those incidents that weren't good got a lot of news, right? You all remember some of those. And yet Starbucks is very, very progressive, extremely progressive. So, and they're very sensitive. They're very sensitized to that. So this is where the research is in 2020. We're way different than we were in 1980 or 1990. Okay, so the next slide, next video will be a little shorter, about 4 minutes. And it's, again, going back to that panel that we were on, that conference we were doing, looking at the impact of persons with disabilities on workplace culture. Okay. Play it.
Here, I think, from a business culture standpoint, and again, my company's a family company, and before we started the program, how we operated was each team member was part of a family. But when I watched the managers who were truly responsible for developing the program and working with the individual, the empathy, the excitement, the feeling of accomplishment and contribution that the management team gained in the process was truly amazing. I think what it did is it helped people even become closer as a family culture. And then also, one thing that I've always expressed and is very important is we all have a role in our communities. And I think, for the team, this program made them feel a bigger part of the community and how they could give back. So it had a tremendous effect positively on the entire organization, and the team members were just spectacular to have with us.
Yeah, I obviously piggyback on what Doug had said, but there was one specific story that I think is important to share. The second individual hired at Doug's was in special orders, and there was a job that a series of tasks that we found that was very repetitive in nature and was just costing immense time for the amount of team in the special orders department. So we plugged this individual with autism in there. She did it phenomenal and exceptional. And this was also an individual who was fired from 3 previous jobs up until what Doug had done. But what we found was that team in special orders, because of, her name was Maurice, because of what she was doing, they became more aware of what the other team members were doing, because they really weren't. She wasn't, I'm making up the names, but Shirley wasn't aware of what Sally or Jack was doing. So because now they had to be more aware of what their responsibilities and what they had to check in with Maurice, they became more aware of everyone's role. So I think it improved even the business side of them being more productive as a team. So that's just one thing to be aware of when those evidence-based strategies and practices and the education and the training is in place, it goes beyond that I think that corporate culture, but what businesses want to see is many businesses want to see a better productivity and a return on their investment.
And you know, we're painting a picture of everything, you know, with peaches and cream. You know, you will have people inside your organization who, you know, aren't fully on board. And I'll give you an example. So the young lady that David was just talking about, here, I don't think we have issued a physical check in my company for payroll in 10 years. You know, everything's direct deposit. And so what happened was, Marie, she got her pay stub and it was direct deposit, and she couldn't understand why she couldn't go cash her check and see the cash. And, you know, trying to explain to her, well, the money's already in your account. She's like, no, it's not. So she physically needed to take a check to the bank, cash a check, see the cash, and then give it back to the teller to put into her bank account. And so the individual who was responsible for our payroll is like, well, we can't do that. And I'm like, we can do anything. I go, you know, we can either just go get petty cash and pay her, or you know, we do have checks. I sign them every week that go to a variety of vendors. Issue a check and we'll sign it.
Okay, next slide. So the particular anecdote at the end by Doug, I'm glad we were able to play that, because it was such a simple thing. But again, he's a president, okay? He's got the power, and he's like, no, we're just going to do this. It's not that big of a deal, all right? And I think the closer that our upper management and top management get to the upper and top management of, you know, the companies that are in, you know, the respective states that you represent, the greater likelihood we have of those types of things happening. I think what I have learned the most in my career related to this, and I continue to be just I get extremely excited when somebody gets a job that others didn't think they could get a job. And I still haven't lost my enthusiasm by any means, especially when I realize that, you know, when you talk to either the Chamber of Commerce or Rotary clubs or societies for human resource managers, well, that's one group. But when you start talking about churches and Little League baseball teams and, you know, women's garden clubs and, you know, local bands in a community, and you begin to realize that all those families have got either people with disabilities that are growing up and want jobs, or have got husbands who are in middle to upper to very upper management, or know people who are like they sell product to them. And we're not using that. We're not using that network enough. Some of us are, but in order to really, really power it through, we need to use that network and not just try and use the tools that we might have learned in our university courses. That came out over and over again. And a lot of it's common sense. And, I know that there's a number of people on here. We've got a lot of people on here, and I'm so pleased and happy that people decided to come and listen on this Friday afternoon here. And you know a lot of this, but then there may be people who don't know it enough, or we may know it on a kind of pedantic or educational level, but we're not really doing it. We're not executing it. So let's take a look at, let's move to the next slide. So why should businesses hire people with disabilities? Okay, we've got, next slide. People with disabilities are great resources. There should often be a balancing of commitment to hire people with disabilities with their metrics that they may have already, whether it's healthcare or, whatever the business is. They are looking at maybe overcoming deficit perspectives and overcoming this charitable impulse, and as opposed to how can I maneuver the use of this person to maximize my revenue and my market share. And then understanding and supporting this whole concept of intersectionality in the workplace, which is a big fancy word for having different folks who talk different, look different, or what we think looks different. By 20, 30 or 40 or 50, a lot of us who are on here, we may be the ones that are not in the, we may be very much in the minority, okay? But just look around you. Things are changing all the time, okay? And I think just like business is beginning to understand they need to embrace climate change, they know they have to improve infrastructure, they are beginning to understand that they need more creativity and intersectionality in the workplace. Okay, so what does this mean for persons with disabilities, especially coming off of COVID-19 in the last year? Let's think about this a minute. We have been through living HELL for the last year. Parents trying to help their kids understand, math or conjugation of the verb to be over the internet when the internet service doesn't even work. Fear of, having this disease and getting sick and not being able to say goodbye to your loved one. People not coming into the workplace. Basically, people not being able to see each other as much anymore. So what does this mean? Does this mean that people with disabilities will never be able to work again? Well, let's just take a look harder at it. Go ahead. So there's some very interesting things that have happened. And it's very interesting. Out of disasters sometimes comes opportunity. And when I was preparing for this presentation, it wasn't just a question of pulling on kind of what our research was and what I knew clinically and anecdotally and had learned from other people who were smarter than me, both on the supply and demand side, but also with a great interest that I have in business. That's my undergraduate degree, and I've always had a great interest in business. So let's just take a look at these areas. To me, Zoom or Skype in the past was just something I didn't want to do. It was like talking to a blank screen, no feedback, didn't like it. Well, Zoom is our world now. This is how we communicate. And I think there's a company called Chegg, all right? And, they do a lot of the online learning. And so, if you want to follow the stock market, you can see all the ways the virtual communication are going on. Biotechnology. You can take a look at these little vaccine companies. You can take a look at the way that they're trying to figure out logistically to deliver vaccines to people. Okay. The gig economy. Interesting paper just came out in the Journal of Occupational Rehab by two Peters, Peter Harper and Peter Blank, called Gig Economy Implications for People with Disability. Well, the gig economy, represented by companies like Upwork or Fiverr, a company actually from Fiverr from Israel, they basically are companies that promote small businesses starting up. Okay, very, very small businesses starting up. And what do you know, when people got laid off, using the true American spirit, they said, well, we're going to start our own little company. And so they went to these companies, and these gig economies became a whole new way of doing business. And then how about the televisits? And so all of a sudden Teledoc is hot, or ZocDoc is hot. What about communication? Now you do everything by DocuSign or DocuDog. Or what about big data? Big data was already big, all right? But now you got companies like Snowflake and, Palantir. And, I'm just thinking of the people with differing disabilities, spinal cord injury, brain injury, mental health disorders, who may need a break, people who have had health disorders, who are detached from the workplace for a period of time and need to come back. These are all areas where they can work, because American business has been resourceful and has gone to these ways. And this is the only reason that in this last year, 2020, that the overall economy is not completely fallen off a cliff. And this year will probably boom and be up 6, 7, or 8%. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide. Let's now move from the demand side and look a little bit more on the supply side. So remember that early question that I threw at you? Where are the potential workers with disabilities, and what programs can help with business? Well, those of us that are either professors or teachers or counselors or in the rehab area, whether it's program delivery or whether it's upper management, we know basically the answer to these questions. But the new Amazon fulfillment center that is come out in the western part of Richmond, or the huge one that's going to be up in Northern Virginia, okay, or the Amazon that's going to be near Nashville, they may not know where to find the people with disabilities, and that's Amazon. Now, Amazon corporate might, but that local group might not. All right, so let's take a look at some of the things that's on us. We need to know what the labor market demands are. We need to know what the career opportunities could be. I wish, like all get out, that I could make the rehab counselor training programs in our country, have everybody minor in business management so they could learn about logistics, the supply chain, marketing. I had some nice conversations with the former assistant commissioner, actually the head of rehab, a gentleman named Jim Hannafy from Texas. I got him turned on to Salesforce.com and some of the methodology they use for their salespeople. And brilliant that he had them in no time as consultants. We need to think like business. We need to understand what they need. We need to develop a skill set that's required by businesses. And only then are we really going to truly have a relationship with businesses. I always say we hire We have, I think, about 18 or 19 employment specialists at our research and training center. We're CARF accredited and work closely with our Voc Rehab and our vendor to them, along with many other vendors in the state. But when I have opportunities to talk to our employment specialists, I always tell them, when you're going in to talk to a business, your first question should be, hey, how's business? How is business? How's, how are things going? Get business talking about their business. Build a relationship that way. And then little by little, you can get into the issues of how you can perhaps supply some demand for them. Okay, next slide. So vocational rehabilitation, and in partnership with community rehabilitation programs, acronym CRPs, see the employer as a customer. And I think the vast majority of the state VR agencies and agencies that serve individuals with low vision and who are blind increasingly are looking at this as a dual customer approach. An employer is a customer as well as the individual. But I want to reinforce this for everybody, because if the employer's happy, then they're going to be supportive, not just of that individual. Remember, what you're doing if you're going to Best Buy or you're going to Wells Fargo for a job is you're not looking to make one placement. You're looking to have a relationship so that they will call you and maybe hire another person and another person and another person. So you need to help your staff identify what their needs are and learn their culture. Marketing, business development, implementing a strategy, maintaining networks with business. And, being a professor, it certainly isn't for me to tell, somebody as smart as, a Jim Hanafy or Kathy Hayfield with all of her experience in the state of Virginia as our commissioner, or her predecessor, Jim Rothra, the best way to do this. But I am increasingly convinced that hiring only one person as a business liaison, it's going to be uphill in a state like Virginia, where it takes 7-8 hours to go from Virginia Beach all the way down to Wise County in Southwest, right on the borders of Kentucky and Tennessee. I mean, we're rural, we're urban, we're suburban. We've got to have enough of our staff that understand what business is about, and small business as well as larger businesses, and know how to do that homework, that they know how to do the approach right. Because if they can't do the approach right, one person can't do the job. So, just continue on that thought process. Next slide. So you're looking at building the networks and partnerships, and I'll leave it to you to decide with the business that you're working with what that partnership looks like. Because a partnership doesn't mean barging in on them every minute, badgering them with phone calls constantly. The partnership means that they can depend on you and you can depend on them, and that there's an honest, legitimate communication between the two of you about well, honestly, transparency about how things are going. And your objective isn't necessarily to use that partnership to get as many people jammed in there and hired as possible, but to create a relationship where maybe they recommend you as a vendor. So areas that we can improve, and I certainly include VCU RRTC with this. Next one. Next slide. we've already established that, whoa, back that one up. I haven't gotten that one yet. We've already established that the staff in rehab often do not fully understand the culture, and that there is often a lack of urgency in making rapid placement. And I know it can be very bureaucratic at times. And that at times there are low expectations of people with disabilities. Or, we feed into sometimes about it being, just charitable. So, just continuing on, some of the common mistakes I think that we all make, and I include myself with that, but we want to avoid. The next slide, please. Is we're selling the disability sometimes, and we don't mean to, but not the person. Lots of times we don't approach employers at the right time. And I'm getting this from the employers. They're telling me this, okay? As providers, we're not doing enough research on those business needs, and we may overpromise in our eagerness to try and get the placement, okay? All right, next one. So how do we improve? Well, what I hear over and over again, and I'm sure you do sometimes, is the more we can avoid sending 5 different community programs to the same place and confuse the employer and use somebody that is more of a preferred vendor, the better off it's going to be. Not necessarily for us, because we're trying to cover everybody, but from a business perspective, they're going to want to see one set of faces, one team. I talked earlier, I just touched on impression management. I want to touch that pretty quickly, but I want to drive home the fact I've learned the hard way that the decision is often made to hire somebody in the first 3 to 5 minutes. Fong Chan, one of the most brilliant people I know from the University of Wisconsin, has done study after study on this. And there's been studies that have also been done in industrial psychology on this, that when a person comes in for an interview, those first 3 to 5 minutes are crucial. If the person that's doing the interviewing leans to them, then the next 35 minutes of the interview, it's almost what's called, I think, confirmatory bias. They're looking for reasons to hire them or to move them ahead to the next interview. If they don't like them for whatever reason, then they're looking for reasons to lightly or gently not bring them back for another interview. Now, I don't know how those impressions, it's impossible to know. And one of the studies that we're doing in this current R&D center we have is we're trying literally to study what's happening at the point of purchase in the first 3 to 6 months. And when I say point of purchase, I mean, why does that first line supervisor like that person that's just been hired and wants to advance them? Or why do they like that person enough that they want to interview them more? Other areas for improvement, and I've got some stats on this that I think are going to blow you away. They really blew me away. We think we're persistent. I don't think we're persistent enough. And I also don't think that once we have gotten in the door, or we feel like we're getting close to the door, I don't think that we sell our own capacity to help well enough. I mean, the people, for example, and I've been spoiled going way back with the Joe Ashleys and even further back to Al Dickerson's, who I just adored that man. He was the first VR director I ever knew in the 80s. The rehab agency and a number of the CRPs are extremely, extremely good. Okay, they really get it. But I'm not sure that that's always conveyed to the business. So that's on you. if you're a rehab agency or you're the CRP, about how can you convey it so you're not trying to just sound like a salesman, but let them know that you're there to help. Okay, next slide. So check this out, folks. This blew me away when I saw this, and Jennifer McDonough gave it to me. Now, just assume employment specialists are salespeople. Just assume that for the moment, all right? 48% of salespeople never follow up with a prospect. 25% make a second contact and then they stop. 12%, only 12% will make 3 contacts and then they stop. And only 10% make 3 or more contacts, make more than 3 contacts, and then they stop, okay, because they haven't had success. All right, continue. It keeps going. 2% of the sales are made in the first contact. That's it. Only 2%. 3% on the second contact. 5% on the third contact. I'll jump you to 9. 80% of all of your placements are going to be made on the 5th to the 12th contact. So what I'm telling you, and let's see, I guess this slide didn't have this. This is from Q4 Intelligence, Kevin Trokey, November 18th, and I don't have the year. I've got it in the references in the back, I believe. Okay, I wasn't just making this up. This slide reference came in right literally 4 days ago. Okay, because I didn't want to show a reference, but to me, what it just it was very humbling to me. It made me realize that when I say we're not working hard, it's not that we're not necessarily working hard, but we're not working smart. Okay. So let that sink in on you a little bit, and let's just continue on, because this is all about planned persistence. Do not stop at persistence. You've got to have a plan for persistence, which means you got to have a protocol for the timing and the frequency and the message. When are you going to go? How often are you going to go? And what are you going to say? Okay, next slide. What are you going to ask business? Do your employees have duties which take time away from their main area of expertise? Are there tasks that can be done more efficiently by somebody else? This is all data for you that you can store when you look at your cases that might not be the top case that you think is perfect. The 7th case, you pull them off because they fit these questions better. Are the tasks that need to be done but are often left undone daily? We have somebody right now in a very large corporation, I won't name the company, that's doing fabulously in this, okay? And 3 more questions on this front. Are there days or time of the week when business volume is exceptionally high? Are there tasks you'd like to see done more often or aren't being performed? Do you pay somebody overtime or find temporary help to find certain tasks? Now, if you're following me and you understand what customized employment is, you know that these are the little tricks that are going to get you that information. But if you don't ask those questions or get decent answers, then you're not going to be effective. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And in a little bit, I'm going to have another video for you. Okay, so how are workers supported in the workplace? Now we're getting to the supply side more. Next slide. And what is the status? What is the status of employment for persons with disabilities? Well, next slide. Well, it's not a pretty picture. All right. I told you at the beginning, we're running about a 60 to 80% unemployment rate, and we're more likely to experience persistent poverty. And the outcomes are even worse for people with intellectual and developmental disorders. In fact, the National Longitudinal Transition Study, RU, I think just recently in 2021, might have been 2020, reinforced an earlier study that showed that of all the different disabilities in the special ed area, that the autism spectrum disorder was the hardest one to find employment for. And that was the most challenging one, okay? And yet, if you talk to businesses, they've all heard about autism. They just don't know exactly what it is. So it's up to us to explain to them that people with autism really have a lot of gifts. We just got to fit them into the right situation with the right supports. Okay, next one. So despite the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, and there's been research and policy promoting competitive integrated employment, we've still got too many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, especially, not engaged in work. And so we end up looking like this. Next slide. And we've got still about 5,000 either adult activity centers or sheltered workshops. Although the United States Department of Justice is using Olmstead, which was a Supreme Court decision in 1999, and then now they're using Title I of the ADA to go to states and to seriously question what they're doing and whether or not they're promoting integration for individuals like they read ADA. And recently all the workshops in Rhode Island and Vermont were shut because of that. Now I have a slide that's going to last about 5 minutes. It's actually a video. Some of you have already seen it, I think, or if you haven't, at least if you've been to St. Mary's, you've seen Damon. He's a young man with autism, and you've already seen Alyssa. He's a good, perfect walking example of success. And so, enjoy. Go ahead.
Doing what you're doing.
I make a transformer. 5. Yes, I'm ready.
Damien had an internship in the inpatient pharmacy. He was responsible for checking all of the drugs. They're individually packed and checking the expiration dates. And he also was responsible for cleaning the shelves and just really keeping it very organized in the department. This is something that they often needed a tech to do, but it really wasn't getting done as frequently as it probably should have been.
There is 6 runs to go, right?
This turned into a job because as the internship was coming to a close, the department really didn't see how they could continue without having him there to complete this job for them, because it really is critical. The job really evolved. In addition to checking the expiration dates, Damien also learned how to restock drugs, and then he learned how to make deliveries to the outpatient infusion center. This kind of came about because Damien was getting done with his work quickly, and he has a lot of energy, and that energy was being released in the department, which was causing a distraction to his coworkers. He has a tendency to script loudly, and he was actually getting on coworkers' computers and finding things to fill his own time with, which were not productive and were distracting to the department. His supervisors wanted to continue to have him working there, and so they contacted his job coach to see what we could do to continue to use his assets, but also to help out the department. And so that's how the delivery started. The outpatient infusion center is attached to the hospital, and this is where patients are going to receive chemotherapy and other cancer treatments.
Thank you for doing it.
When we're waiting in this room, how should we wait?
By the door.
And what's our volume?
Volume down. Volume down. I wait for Jessica in there.
Damien, it's okay to speak in a regular volume.
She's in the room.
Okay. We just can't shout things like, "I'm finished." Does that make sense?
Nope. Not make sense.
When we're at work?
I keep the volume down. I keep the voice down.
How about your body?
Keep my body still.
Hello.
I knock by the door.
Okay, Damien.
It's
what
another
number
run.
is this?
6.
Right.
This run is number 6. Non-chemo. No way, Stephen. No way. Yes.
At the time, a volunteer was responsible for making the deliveries to the outpatient infusion center from the pharmacy, or if a volunteer wasn't there, one of the pharmacists or the techs had to do it. It really wasn't done on a strict schedule, and patients were having to wait several hours to get the treatment. The inpatient pharmacy and the outpatient infusion center decided to collaborate and create this job for Damien so that he was helping their department to run more efficiently to provide better care to the patients who were waiting for treatment.
I finish. Number 6 is finish. There's yours over here? Mm-hmm. I work in the pharmacy and OPIC. I open a suitcase, wait for chemo, and on chemo, I check expiration dates at work. I pull expired drugs and find month. I stay off this computers at work. I eat lunch. I follow the rules. I follow the plan.
Who wrote that?
I wrote it.
That's great. Damien's been working for almost 5 years, and we do continue to provide him with social supports at work. At this point, we are no longer implementing a self-monitoring plan and working on it together 4 times throughout the day. His department has been trained on how to enforce the rules, and Damien is at the point now where he has written his own plan, and he knows what the expectations are, and it's written clearly for him by himself.
Where we do next, Stephen? Where we do next?
Chemo and non-chemo.
They're both?
Yep, they're both.
Yes, they're both. What time is it?
Time to go.
10:30, please.
10:30.
The answer is 10:30. Run number 7.
We do continue to communicate regularly with the departments, and they know that they're able to contact us if there is a situation that becomes larger than what they feel that they're able to handle, or that they need additional support. Then they always call us, and we come and provide immediate support to the department and the employee.
Okay. So by now, we'll go to the next slide. By now, you're beginning to really see the power of a really good employment specialist. Okay. Alyssa's been with us a good 6 or 7 years. And unfortunately, most of the people that we have, are, similarly very competent, and mostly have gained the trust of the company that we work at, different companies that we're in right now. So, Damien had an internship there, and then they hired him, and he requires less and less help. And our internships, by the way, the very first internship got started with some help from the Virginia Department of Education. But then, for those of you who are, go to the next slide, please. Okay. For those of you who are in VR and are looking at expanding your vocational, your project search, or your strength on success or internship programs, our Voc Rehab department came up with a milestone program. In fact, Joe Ashley, I believe, really took the lead on this. And at the different intervals of success, we were able to receive, some funding to continue, supporting people like Alyssa. Alyssa is the type of person that could talk to somebody like Doug that you saw earlier. Okay, easier than I could. All right, because she's there all the time, and the trust has been established. So again, remember, we had a why work from the business standpoint. Now we have why work from the supply side. Good pay, healthcare benefits if he wants them, control over job selection, upward mobility if he wants to leave, and our research over 10 years has shown that people with autism, at least, become more independent as a function of work. Okay, so that's a good thing. That's better than $15,000 a year staying in a day program for the rest of your life, or just sitting at home. Next slide. So what does Alyssa do? What she does is support employment. She also does customized employment. We'll start with that. Support employment is basically real work in an integrated work setting, presumably for people with more severe challenges, because somebody with milder challenges wouldn't need Alyssa helping as much, but initially doing a lot of ongoing support. And that's where Voc Rehab often will step right up and help pay for those services. And then maybe Medicaid waiver will provide the long-term services. In the meantime, business is not paying anything, but is getting, wonderful support services from highly trained staff. We just get these people, get these partners together, all right? And the Voc Rehab person is driving the train, basically driving the train to try and get the business and the job coach working together and the family working together, and often dealing with SSI and SSDI issues. Okay, go ahead. So if you want to go back 30 or 40 years, it is a pretty big paradigm shift. Again, I hope you don't mind me picking on you if you're on here, Kathy, but Kathy would remember at one time we were basically running only centers and we weren't providing supports in the businesses. Now it's much more commonplace for supporting, coming up with individualized supports needs, like the job accommodation network can provide, but can be delivered by an Alyssa Brooke in any of the number of businesses. Okay, so that's an advantage that you have if you're trying to be, create a relationship with a business. You say, well, look, we could bring an employment specialist in here. Okay, all right, next. I've got about 2 or 3 more slides, so I'll probably go through these word things pretty quick. Marks, by the way, is Marks, not Mark. Okay, it's only about 2 minutes. Shoot.
Marks.
Yes.
We're not working without the gown.
Perfect. Way.
Let's go get it. Marks is very particular about keeping himself neat and clean, and one of the things that he was doing, he was problem solving on his own because he felt that his pants were getting dusty, the bottoms of his pants were getting dusty. So he took it upon himself to alter his uniform. Hey, Mark.
What's that?
Now something else is missing.
My gloves? Yeah, perfect.
We don't need to follow them that way. Come right back with those gloves on. One of the sets of his scrubs, he actually took a scissor to and cut them so they were now cropped pants so that they weren't getting dusty. And then when we talked to him about that, he started to roll his pants up, and that does not fit the uniform requirements. It's also an issue with infection control to have your skin showing like that in the hospital. And so as many times as we would remind him verbally about this, it didn't seem to stick. So we took a picture of him, and this picture was posted up on the door of the linen room with his permission. And each time before he walked out to go make a delivery, he was able to check himself and make sure that he was properly dressed.
Okay, take it that way.
Huh.
Just keep right there. Keep it right there. I'll bring this one in. And we good, thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Perfect once again.
Yeah, you're like one cool.
He helps me get my carts, the soil linen onto the carts, and then I get my carts onto the truck. Mark is a very good worker, very studious, very hardworking, and without him, I would have a hard day, put it that way. So I'm thankful that he gets the opportunity to work with me every day, and I enjoy working with him. Thank you.
Okay, so this thing called supported employment here, just a very quick overview of what goes on, just because I think many of you already are aware of this, but if we get to the next slide, please. There's basically 4 basic functions that we're looking at. We need a profile of that job seeker. We need to develop a job, find a job. That's where that business partnership comes in. But then we don't stop there. We have to provide training, and we don't stop there either. Because even if people are presumably trained, if there's a different supervisor or the person has a problem at home or with transportation or decides they want to switch jobs, there needs to be a follow-along mechanism. And this is where Voc Rehab will work with a community service program to provide follow-along services. And the employment specialist is right in the middle of this, working with the VR counselor as partners, again, on the supply side. Okay, next one. And so in assessment, you're looking at not necessarily assessments that would take place in a room, but situational assessments that might happen actually right in a work site for 3 or 4 hours or for a day or 2 days to see productivity, what interests are, how much physical ability they have, do they get tired, how well do they take criticism from the employment specialist. Next slide. I'm not a big fan of long tests. I'm a bigger fan of short, real life assessments, situational assessments in real work settings. Okay. These assessments should reflect the vocational goal. Okay. Next slide. We'll take a look at James here. We did a long-term assessment of him in a respiratory therapy department, looking at oximeters from a biohazard room. We would have never done this in 1983. We were putting people at Wendy's. Okay. Here this guy's going in instead of going to Wendy's. Not that there's anything wrong with Wendy's. Love Wendy's. Okay. I'm happy to get a milkshake at Wendy's. Happy to. But there should be a diversity of jobs based on people's interests. And if you have an internship, you find out whether you like it. You do an assessment. You see how he would fit in something like this. Next one. Next slide. But what do we learn? We learned that he could follow written instructions. Bit of a perfectionist. Okay. Barriers. He really needs a rigid schedule and could be a self-stimmer. Now, a little self-stimming, not too bad. You'll meet somebody a little bit later here who's a self-stimmer, not a big deal. Okay. It's all about what the business will tolerate. And a lot of businesses will tolerate a great deal if they're getting good performance from their worker. Okay. Next slide. So you hear these terms: customized employment, support employment. Not the purpose of this presentation to do a major breakdown of the two of them different. Let's just say that customized employment is a part of support employment that has got some very unique different aspects to it. Still competitive integrated employment, still real work for real pay, still not in a sheltered workshop, still using job coaching supports, but using something called discovery and a more detailed job negotiation. The last two are uniquely different and extremely helpful. Go ahead. This is not customized employment. This is a sheltered workshop or an adult activity center. This is what we want to try and avoid. This is what the Department of Justice is going to we'll probably start shutting them down again now that we've got a person like Merlin Garland that's going to be running the Department of Justice. I imagine they'll be swinging hard again to go after states that are not integrating but are segregating. Go ahead. Yeah, so this is customized employment. There you see some graduates and some people working. Discovery, next slide, is, remember I talked about job profiling? Well, this is more of that. Home visits, interviewing more people. Really works especially well, in my view, my personal view, for more challenging individuals that's harder to find jobs for, because you get more information. Okay, they tell you more and you learn more. And remember those questions earlier that I was showing you about what you should be asking business about overtime, temporary work, having things that weren't getting done that needed to be done, voila, here you are. Somebody could come in and they might not even have posted the job, and you could maybe, offer somebody that could do this. Next slide. And that would fit in very nicely to this whole concept of negotiating for a position that maybe isn't even posted yet. Pretty cool. Okay, next one. Types of job development. Here's our lingo. Here's our jargon, folks. Job carving, job negotiation, job sharing, self-employment. Well, self-employment, that's a gig economy, all right? I'm not sure what job carving would be. I've heard Erin Riley, say that she thinks it's more like Thanksgiving, all right? But it's basically breaking up a job into different tasks based on what a person can do, rather than trying to beat them over a head to teach them something that would use up all of VR's money on tasks that they, probably isn't going to learn. All right, next slide. So if we're going to go into Unum, or we're going to go into Kindred, or we're going to go into IBM, one of the departments, what are we going to offer for work supports? Job coaches like Alyssa, transportation options, help with assistive technology. These are all things VR can offer, pay for, give expertise for. It's not just getting money from VR, it's getting their expertise as well as from the CRPs. So let's take a quick look at, this will take about 4 minutes. We're about on time here. Dylan is another guy, very interesting fellow. And I'll let him speak for himself. Go ahead.
Who are you?
We're getting individuals like Dylan from the school system. It's transition age student, so transitioning from school into work. And what we've had the good experience of doing with them is going through kind of 10 to 12 week long internships, which are basically just assessment experiences on steroids. So he was just able to be in each internship experience for a lot longer. And he had 3 different experiences, one on the labor and delivery unit, one in the laboratory services department, and one in the emergency department. It took all 3 internships for us to kind of find the right ticket for Dylan.
Looking fun.
Skill that we call peel packing, where we take individualized instruments and sterilize them separately from a tray version, if you will, with multiple instruments. Again, it's a very time-consuming task. It has to be done specifically in a certain way.
Dylan has several types of supports that he uses while he's working, and they've been ongoing as his needs have changed and as his tasks have changed and as we've noticed different behaviors. But this is one that we use to try. We've spent a lot of time working on emotional identification for Dylan and how he's feeling that day. Because what we've learned through this process is that if he comes in on a good note and can get started on time, then he's usually good throughout the day. And as we were trying to fade support, we were trying to identify at what point in time we needed to be called in from staff in order to come in and provide support to get him started. So this is the volcano scale that Dylan uses, and he filled this out with his school staff, and then we did it again while we were here. These are some additional volume supports for him.
We can just point and say, okay, you're way up here on your volume when you need to be down here. And then, by showing him that, we can go up and ask him, where are you right now in your volume? And so, he'll hear that and then follow through by pointing on the chart. And it's pretty interesting to see that sometimes he's just not aware of where his volume is. We don't even know if he's aware that, he's doing it out loud.
He doesn't use these ones nearly as much because we were able to fade the supports, but we keep them there just in case a new coworker comes on and wants to learn more about Dylan. Initially, one of the job coaches would fill this out with him. He would get a plus or a minus if he completed the step, and now Dylan keeps track of this himself. That Dylan had a really hard time staying focused with his work. He did a lot of stimming, so he would he really likes deep pressure, so he would press into his face and squeeze his body. A lot of jumping around if he was agitated, and the things that would agitate him were usually too much instruction from us and too much correction, because he does like to work by himself. So you can see there was kind of a disconnect where he wanted to be independent, but he was having a hard time focusing and staying on track.
Sometimes it can interfere with his work pace and his rhythm, but the volume is really what's more disruptive to the work environment.
There are the individual workstations, so Dylan wouldn't be working close to somebody else, so he kind of had his own space where if he needed to kind of calm himself down, do some bouncing, kind of press in on himself, that it was appropriate for him to do so, and he wasn't going to interfere with somebody else's work. If you can match him to an environment that allows him to do some of his stimming, take some of his time to kind of process things, then as far as getting the work done, as far as counting and doing those sorts of things, he's going to get it done.
100.
Okay. So we're coming near an end. I've only got another handful of slides here, not that many to share with you, but I don't think I would do justice to this presentation if I didn't at least address a little bit about how do we get people that are still in high school to work. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of slides and what some of the more recent research has taught us about this. What are some of the predictors of post-school success? Well, work experience, vocational education, inclusive education, occupational coursework, self-determination. These are all correlates of success. They're not evidence-based practice. They're not controlled research studies. They are correlated studies that highly suggest that these types of activities in high school will lead to a job. If you turn to the next slide, however, we can take a look and see that the most powerful behavior that young people with disabilities, of all disabilities, can do before they lose the mandated special education law that the federal government gives them through the Individuals with Disabilities for Education Act, is to actually have a job before they leave high school. So previous paid work experience prior to graduation has been repeatedly shown to be a strong predictor. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Eric Carter from Vanderbilt University, is conducting through one of our R&T centers a randomized clinical trial that is going to provide some evidence-based research that shows that people that have had jobs before they left school, as opposed to those that didn't, were more likely to have employment on follow along. But we do know that internships such as Project Search, and those are some of the examples you've been seeing, Strength on Success, the Marriott program, and there's others, along with apprenticeships, some of the community college activities, post-secondary education activities that have been going on, dual enrollment. Those are all things that lead very nicely into employment. What you want is a seamless, you don't want people going home and sitting at home with no work. Okay, go ahead. I think we'll skip this last video here because I'd like to share with you one last tool that one of our colleagues have developed, and then leave about 20 minutes or so for comments or questions, whatever you'd like to do. Businesses are saying to us, and have been, how do you measure whether our workplace culture is really inclusive enough for workers with disabilities? We want this to happen, but we don't really know how to measure it. So the person that I mentioned earlier that is so brilliant, Fong Chan, he and his team from the University of Wisconsin, Tim Tansey and others, have been developing and have validated a reliable tool, go ahead, that is called the Disability Inclusion Profiler. And it's set for executives, and it's also set for middle management to utilize. There's a number of domains that you can utilize to evaluate yourself pre-test and post-test. And some of the practices are like communicating the commitments, the infrastructure that they've put in place, for example, within their HR department and resources. Do they have disability management specialists? Have they allocated funding for disability inclusion training? Have they set utilization goals for employment? That would be at the executive level, okay? And then at the middle management and the staff level, are these managers helping to create paid internship programs or summer disability employment programs? How well have they created MOUs, partnership agreements with state voc rehab agencies, or partnered with community rehab organizations so that they could put in place a preferred vendor operation? So, for example, if you want to work with, Nextera, or you want to work with Dominion, or you want to work with Duke as a utility, and they prefer to only have one vendor working with them, have you put that in place and not necessarily be the only person ever that would refer, but would be the primary person that Nextera would go to, or Duke or Dominion would go to, okay? And other opportunities also there for disability inclusion training at the department level, all right? So what we've tried to do with this tool, and we'll be putting it into place, we hope in the next couple of years, will be to show businesses how this really scientifically developed tool that Dr. Chan developed with 460 businesses could be used to facilitate evaluating whether your business is actually becoming a business-friendly culture to people with disability. That would be really helpful for the supply side to know and to see. But I think it's going to cut both ways, which really that brings me really to the end, because in many ways what I've tried to do here, and I thank you for your attention. I know it was an awfully long presentation, and I'm sorry we could only get 500 into the room here. I hope that I was told that there was 1,000, 1,200 people that had signed up. I don't know whether that's true, but it had to be over in the YouTube, on the YouTube side. I hope that's worked for you. And please now, without the videos, I have no problem at all with sharing the link with you. I can't answer them, then I'll tell you I can't answer them, okay? And I'll get back to you. But I probably will have heard the questions. I just won't necessarily know the answers perfectly. So, or just comments, because I know we have some very experienced people on here, and anybody would like to share experiences, just please feel free to do that and let the other people who are on here know, so that it isn't just me trying to be the expert. So I'll turn it over to you, Walt, for questions or comments now.
Okay. The first question, Paul, is My dream job is to go into business and companies as a corporate trainer to provide them with training and guidance on working with people with disabilities in order to educate them on the value they can bring to the business. Do you have any suggestions on how to accomplish this?
Set up an LLC and make yourself $1 million in the first 2 or 3 years. Okay. I'm being, I know, facetious and maybe seemingly sarcastic, but the time is now for that type of activity. In fact, that is a wonderful, wonderful dream to have. And I know some people who worked at a bank in Richmond, and I know some people that worked in rehab, and they decided to go out on their own and create an LLC that was a consulting firm to work with foundations like the Pepsi Foundation, for example, that wanted to promote employment for persons with disabilities, and also with companies that were interested in what to do and put into place some of the things that I was saying. Now, in order to do that, of course, you have to have the expertise. And ideally, you would represent the supply side and the demand side. And you would also know how to market yourself and have a website, go out and communicate with HR and the C-suite and let them know what the services are that you offer. You might find that VR would be willing to contract with you to help them with overflow work that they have. You might find that businesses would welcome you going out to find people on the supply side. So that is one heck of a good question to kick it off with. And it's also a great dream job to have. And I think you could do very well with it. Although any startup job in the gig economy, you can go to Fiverr, Upwork to figure out how to get started. Any startup is always going to be a little rugged the first 6 to 12 months. But if you're willing to try, I really see that as being a demand need there. So thank you for that question.
Paul, the next question is, organizations have been investing a lot of time and energy over the years in their employment efforts on women and minorities and measuring progress. Do you think self-identification and measuring progress when it comes to hiring people with disabilities is the right direction for organizations, or do you think it could have other unintended consequences?
Oh, what a great question. I was speaking with a former executive from a very large corporation. Actually, Dr. Rumrell and I both were a couple of days ago, and that question came up. And Dr. Rumrell is an expert on disclosure, and we actually have had him into VCU to do webinars on disclosure. And we really kicked that one around. And where we came down was that the decision really rested initially very strongly with the client, with the person. If they were absolutely didn't want to be labeled, didn't want to be said, hey, I've got this person with autism, or I've got this person who had MS, or I've got this person with whatever label is out there, health-wise or whatever, then we respect that and we do the best to help them find employment by not disclosing it all and keeping it completely, secret, okay, until they give us the word differently. On the other hand, if a client is like, well, I don't really care, then I think my view has always been it's not necessarily saying, well, there's a person that has autism, or there is a person that has spinal cord injury. It's more about, this is the person's resume. This is the person's work ethic. This is why I would recommend strongly that you bring him in for an interview. Or if the person goes in by themselves, you do the rehearsal with them and you do the mock interviews, okay? Or if that person wants you to come in with them, then you've already gone through how they would say, yes, I have this thing that the doctor calls Asperger's. However, as you can see from my resume, I have done several internships here. I did it, I got a certificate from 2 years at the Jefferson Training Technical and Community College in Louisville. And I would love to work here. I would love here. It'd be my dream to be here. I've got family members that have used your products before. So I'm not sure that it's a yes or no question. I think it's more of a question of what the client wants. And then depending on what the client wants, figuring out the best way to share it with the employer. Remember that first 3 to 5 minutes that I gave you, that is not bull. That impression management is critical, all right? And so the risk that employer problem for me, and he's smiling the whole time, but he's already made his mind up. On the other hand, maybe if you put that out there and you show, look, this is what I got, but the reality is I got a lot more strengths and I really want this job and I will work like crazy. And my internships were here. In other words, I can do this. That you swing the person that way. Okay. I mean, we just don't know, any of us, whether we have a disability or not, we don't know what that bias is when we meet people the first time. I guess it's kind of like Match.com or Bumble or something. Okay. You're match dating, you're meeting somebody for the first time. You don't really know until you're there. So that's a great question. And, it's the best answer that I can give. And it's the most honest answer that I can give too. All right. But, at a different time, I know more people want to talk. Phil Romo also would be a good person to probably reach out to. Okay, Walt, who else we got?
This next question is, how has the pandemic impacted supported employment and customized employment placements?
Yeah, great question. In fact, Arun Karpoor from Autism Speaks, he's Dr. Karpoor is a chief scientific officer there, I think, asked that same question. And he and I, after the summit, working with Paul Shattuck and Dave Wittenberg, came up with an idea to actually ask that question to 5 people who had been working before the pandemic and continued working, lost their job and was brought back. And we've just completed those 5 case studies of those people. I was involved with all of them. They were 60 minutes, 45 minutes each. And we've sent them to Autism Speaks, and they're going to be using them and making them public probably within the next few months would be my guess. And I'll share a little bit with what came out of that. It really was all over the board. And this was just with people with autism, but the pandemic obviously laid off a lot of people. And when it first hit in March and April and May, not only people with disabilities, but all people were getting hit very hard. All right. But then as more masking occurred and more social distancing occurred, and the pandemic was not quite as virulent as we went through the summer, some of the people were brought back. And what we were able to notice was that some of the people that we had placed were able to come back. And our rehab agency actually in Virginia made some funds available to help facilitate that. And I think that may have happened in some of the other states as well. It's interesting. Some of the people who were employed for a while that were laid off in the pandemic, they didn't go to Social Security, they got unemployment benefits because they'd already been working. The majority of the people who we have placed at VCU are coming back to work when there are jobs available. Now, some of them were small businesses that have not opened up again. So we've had to replace that way and look for jobs for people. In all, the question is a great question. I would say it's been pretty much your basic nightmare, okay, on everybody, because some people have kept their jobs, but they have anxiety. And I would expect 2021 is going to be the same thing: fear of the vaccine, the side effects, things that go along with that. So it's a scary time. It's a scary time. I sit here and say, always fine, because it isn't all going to just be fine. We're going to have to make modifications in the jobs that we look for people with, even now, as we provide job coaching support for people that are virtualizing, because we have people that are placed in jobs that are working virtually. So we have to provide job coach support virtually for people. DJ Hendricks told me yesterday on a call from Jan that they were doing the same thing. They were providing virtual job accommodation support. So this is new. This is new to us. And it's nothing that we asked for, but it's something that we have to learn how to live with. Great question.
Okay. Then the next question is, what are some recommendations for people who have challenges with communication in interviews? We're trying video resumes, but do you have other suggestions?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. You can go on PubMed under Matt Smith. He's a researcher in the psychiatry department from Northwestern. And he, for the last decade, has been using virtual reality as a way to teach interviewing to individuals with autism and other people with communication skills, communication deficits. And, we've toyed with virtual reality because we have a couple of people at VCU Health, one in particular that is nationally known for his virtual reality work. And we just couldn't get traction with it because we had really quite a few other things going on. But what I would tell you is, if you believe me related to impression management, then, and please do, that the interviewing is very important. And I did not used to pay attention to it nearly as much as I have now, okay? If you can get to an interview, those first few minutes are going to be very important. And certainly behavioral rehearsing what the questions may be is a good thing to do in mock interviews. But what I keep coming back to, what would I do if I wasn't working at VCU and I wanted to work at, I'm going to pick on DARS, okay, our Virginia DARS. Before I would go in for my interview with Dee Dee Batten, I would find out all the good things that they've done the last 5 years. Or if I was going to go to work for somebody at the Virginia Division for the Blind, or I was going to work for, pick an agency, okay? I would, in those first 5 minutes, be trying to let them know that I know what they're about, and not try and sell myself so much, but sell them that I know what they do and I want to be part of that team, okay? And so I think if you practice that frequently, even if it comes out a little funny, or if the person doesn't communicate that well and they need some help with either a talking device or, or a job coach, if you're turning it on what that business is about, that lets the business know that you've thought about them and you want to be on their team. That's the way I would approach it, okay? And again, these questions are excellent, Walt. I mean, they are hitting right at the guts of where we need to be in 2020. So next question, please.
Okay. Next question is, how can we encourage IEP teams for transition age youth to contact with regional centers to provide job coaching for students?
Okay, I need that person to tell me a little bit more what a regional center would be. I know in California they have regional centers. Is this person from California or?
We do not know where the person is from. We do not have that information.
Okay. Let me take that on a broad level. On a broad level, with the new law, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act,
excuse me, Paul.
15% of the dollars are supposed to go from the state VR agencies to the public schools to provide what's called pre-employment training services, which could be internships, which could be occupational education, job shadowing, some of the things we talked about before. And in fact, that's what many agencies are doing. That some agencies are struggling with it, trying to figure out what works best because it's relatively new. But that is a mechanism for the schools to reach out to their rehab counselor in the area. For example, in Virginia, I'm sorry to keep using Virginia, but that's where I've been my whole life. Okay, and I'll use Virginia and Kentucky because they're both doing it really well. Okay, in Virginia, we're using the money partly for certain rehab counselors to be designated as transition specialists that work with school districts or schools. And so a school could reach out to them and ask them how to get services or how to get money for some of their kids that are getting ready to graduate. In Kentucky, they're doing a beautiful thing. Okay, in fact, they're doing a study, with us on one of our R&T centers. They have over, I think 104 is what Harold Kleiner told me. There's 104 community rehab counseling partnerships between the schools and OVR in Kentucky, where they team up together so that when individuals are sophomores and juniors, as they move into their senior year, these teams are ready for them. And they have experiences, internships, dual enrollment. Remember, I've been talking about work, but a lot of kids will go to community college, and that may be paid for by VR. It may not be. Okay, it may be paid for by the IEP. All right, and that's where the dual enrollment comes in. So, with the new law, it's called WIOA, and it will be reauthorized in the next few years. I think it's supposed to be fairly soon. You have an opportunity for both the school and the VR service to work together. In fact, that's what the founders of this law wanted in Congress. Okay, and I think that's a broad version. Okay, time for maybe one more.
Okay, let's see. We've got. I'm concerned about some of our most celebrated transition projects like Project Search don't typically look at issues like scalability. How can we work to demand more from the employment programs that are working well so that we can better scale model employment programs to build on the successes they have found?
Yeah, right. Well, I am too. Okay, I couldn't agree with you more. Just because we've worked with Project Search as a model for a number of years at VCU, exclusively with people with autism, because we wanted to see whether or not immersion of individuals into multiple hospitals using ABA strategies would work. And it did, because over 85% of all the individuals in the first 4 years got jobs and were still working 12 months later. And in the next 4 years, we did it again with 4 hospitals, and it was like 77%. None of them went to the host hospitals. They all went to different jobs, and they were all still retained a year later. However, the problem with Project Search, I know one of the criticisms is that they don't pay, and that they don't pay, like Strength and Success is a pay for internship. Bridges is a pay for internship. And I know that's been a criticism, but the biggest criticism I have is not necessarily of the model per se, but exactly what the questioner asked, the scalability. If you're in the city of Philadelphia or even in the city of Richmond, one city, and you have 25 or 30 people graduating, and you can only have 8 people at a site, at a hospital, what do you do with the other 17 that are graduating? You got to call up DARS. You got to call up your transition rehab counselor. You got to put them in a different internship. you've got to do dual enrollment. That's why you need a team working with them when they're younger. You can't just kind of project search. I think there's almost 300 project searches in the United States right now. It's been used successfully. It's overseas. It's been a nice model. It goes 9 months. Now, does it need to go 9 months? That's an empirical question. A number of people that have been in project search might have done just as well with 6 months. I don't know. We followed the model because that was the model. So the scale up issue is a big issue. And I mean, to me, I want to go back to the question that was originally asked about how can I have my dream job of helping business get more people? Because you see, I think that as we get more people into business, business will say, hey, we don't want teenagers. We want people with disabilities. We don't want people that are 75 years old that might have a stroke and not be here tomorrow, okay? We would love to have people with disabilities. We just don't know where they are. We don't know how to work with them. But if you show us how to work with them, we'd love to have them because the ones we have, we like a lot. And the good thing about people with disabilities is they're not fighting to go back to the workshop. They love people that are in employment. The only thing they're afraid of is losing their medical side check. And if they work long enough, then they'll go on to 32 hours or 35 hours a week. But no, the scale up issue is, I use Project Search and the videos because in each hospital there's anywhere from 50 to 75 departments, and you learn many skills, and you have to navigate a lot. And it's a very nice laboratory for having to deal with different job activities and tasks and soft skills. So it's a nice laboratory, but I'm not trying to turn everybody into a hospital employee. That's not what I'm saying. And I am concerned about it being scaled up. I would rather see us take the whole armamentarium of things that we have. Like we have dual enrollment. We have community college straight up with education coaches. We have straight up employment, customized employment coming out of high school. While they're still in high school, they can work part-time, seasonality in the summer. We have strength on success. That's another, semester-long internship that can be used. Okay. So the real question for the kids coming out of high school is, are we going to let them have jobs by the time they're juniors and seniors and know how to get jobs? Or are we going to send them home and hope eventually that they can get in to VR, and hope eventually if they can't get into VR that Medicaid waiver will pick them up? And they won't, because there's not in most states. Okay. I mean, they're just not. I mean, we have people that started 2012 still waiting for slots in 2021. Okay. So there hasn't been enough money. So it's a great question. Tell you what, if there's any more questions, I'll take one more because I haven't had a bad question yet. And I don't know that I'm answering well, but the questions are extremely, they're very knowledgeable. The people are very knowledgeable, and they are making me happy that people are sophisticated enough to answer them more thoroughly. I'll take one more question.
Okay. The next question. Can you explain more about the milestone program that you mentioned that Virginia Voc Rehab implemented, and how was Alyssa paid?
Okay. Great question. The milestone model actually, I think, started in Oklahoma years and years and years and years ago, when they wanted to pay for supported employment at different intervals. And places like Wisconsin did the same thing. And Joe Ashley, who now I think has his own company, very smart guy, rather than set up a huge milestone program for all the vendors in Virginia, at least that I was aware of, did not want to keep the entire model going and for Project Search, throughout the state, even though there were more and more searches going on, it was costing more and more money for VR. I think we ran this number for VDO now, 743 that have been in Project Search currently. And that's throughout the entire state. So there's about maybe a dozen, 15, 18 programs. And this is year after year. And we had a thing about the 40%. And the milestone model came up because every 10 weeks, the rotations came to an end. Now, since I don't handle this day in, day out the way Jennifer does, I may have some of this wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Okay. Every 10 weeks, the rotation was going on. And if it was successful, we get a small amount of money. Everybody that came in, no matter how severe autistic they were, they became immediate clients, VR. So when they were placed as 26s. And when they were finally placed at the end, there would be a final milestone payment. And so those dollars would come in this case, VCU had a fund that would allow us to use, and we would help pay Alyssa with that fund. And then we also had some grant dollars, and we would use some of the grant dollars. Now, Alyssa had to do some research as well. She was collecting data, because this was a research program that we did for 10 or 12 years. So we used some of the money that came in from Virginia DARS and the milestone in a program revenue account that was allowed by the feds. And we were able to utilize some of that to expand that program in a way that we normally wouldn't be able to do so. All right. And I think what had happened in our state, is Medicare waiver dollars were sometimes used with other sources as well. In other words, there was some blending of funding, but VR got things started originally at one site in Virginia in 07 or 08, I think it was. And then after that, we came in around 2009 and started working just with autism, and then more and more around the state, from down in the Southwest to Newport News to Northern Virginia, Prince William. It's been a successful program. But to the question of scalability, I mean, if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids like you do in Prince William County and Loudoun County, you can't possibly use Project Search as your only vehicle. It won't work. It's one way, and it's nice to have it, but you have to have other ways to exit these young people and not have them just sit at home. Okay, so it's a great question, and if I butchered some of it, email me, or probably before I get off, shut the phone off, Kathy will email me and tell me I got half of it wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it ran. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I've taken enough of your time, and I know I've been a little redundant and everything, but I hope you've taken something away from this, and it will work to use. And any comments before I part? Or have you left already, Walt?
Nope, I'm here. As advertised, this has been great. Thank you, Paul. It's been an honor and a privilege for you to join us today. I also want to thank you, Paul, for taking time out of your schedule.
And you'll go ahead and leave that link for everybody.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we will.
All right, everybody, be safe.
Paul,
take care.
Paul, thank you very much.
Get vaccinated.
Thanks to our 1,250 best friends for joining us. Stay safe and well, everybody.
Yep. Take care. Be well. Stay safe. Bye-bye.